Okay, listeners, a lot of you have asked and Prep Dish has answered. Now in 2019, Prep Dish offers keto meal plans. In addition to already having paleo and gluten-free, this is such a great way for us to start off the new year eating just maybe a little bit healthier than I did over the holiday season. Okay, so here's the deal. If you haven't done it already, we have a 2-week free trial to check it out and see if it makes a difference for you. I know it has for our family. So go to prepdish.com/heygirl and choose whatever meal plan you want. Maybe you want to try all 3. See what the difference between keto or gluten-free or paleo. They actually have 3 different ones to choose from. And I would love to hear how these plans work for you. So again, prepdish.com/heygirl and check it out, their new keto meal plans.
Hey girls, and welcome to season 3 of the Hey Girl podcast with my mom, Bethany Needham. Each week, guests will share their amazing stories of following Jesus on all kinds of journeys. I hope their stories inspire you to run your race in your place. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, and welcome back. Another week of the Hey Girl podcast, another story that has absolutely blown my mind and challenged and encouraged me in ways I didn't even know one person's story could. I would like to say that I'm being dramatic and kind of overselling, but I am telling you, today's interview is going down in the books for me. I mentioned it to Erin as we talked, but if this interview had totally something went wacky and wrong and the recording didn't come through, if the only person that got to sit through it was me, like God was already doing a massive work in my heart. You're going to know what I mean by the end of this, but let me tell you, Erin Jones came as one of our listeners' recommendations. They nominated her, say, hey, this is a girl you should have on the podcast. And let me tell you, this was one of those moments where I'm like, this nomination business is the best thing we have ever done for Hey Girl, because these people are phenomenal. You guys, you have amazing people in your life. First of all, I just hope that you know that. Like, don't take that for granted. Second of all, I am forever indebted to those of you who have shared those people with me and this podcast, because I am convinced that this story today is going to be one of those stories that is going to stir hearts to the extent that we're going to change the world. We're all going to be world changers. Mark my words. So, Erin Jones, I love you. You have to know that I love you. Didn't know you before I stepped into this, but I feel like we're friends. And so here's the deal. Her story today is probably going to stir some emotion. If you're anything like me, I flat out ugly cried. So get your tissues, but also get a hot cup of coffee, because this is the perfect combination of being inspired, being challenged, really some absolute tear-jerking moments, but also feeling like you just met a friend for life. So listeners, I am not even going to hope you enjoy this. I know you are going to enjoy this conversation with Erin Jones. Okay, listeners, we are here with another episode and another nominated guest. So, first of all, welcome, Erin Jones.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here all the way from Seattle.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. But most of all, I was telling you this before we hit record. This whole nominated guest thing is fairly new to, as far as like really being intentional. And it is my favorite thing like I've ever done on Hey Girl. All of my new favorite people are all of these guests that have been nominated. I just feel like I'm getting to know the people in other people's lives who are like inspire them, encourage them, It's been incredible. So I'm like getting nerdy excited about this interview. I love that you're from Seattle. Nobody can see you, but we usually do like a photo. So you need to know that I'm already obsessed with your hair. I'm having flashbacks to my interview with my girl Sharifa, and you guys together are like now my hair icons. I just want your hair.
My hair gets commentary every single day. Every single day, people want to touch it. Every single day, somebody says something. It has become a talking point, and I know that God gave me this hair to engage people.
Seriously, and girl, you are living that calling strong.
My son just colored it too, so it's like you can't see it now, but it's like red and golden. It's like the leaves on trees that are turning color.
What? Yeah. Did you say your son colored it?
So I am older than I look, but I have an adopted son who's 32, and then I have 3 kids who are 21, 22, 23.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking good for 47 years old. Almost 50.
Lady, I'm adding to your end of the interview questions. What is your skincare regimen? Love it. So I mentioned that you're nominated. That is really my sole connection to you. Like, we've not met before, but a couple of things. I got this email, and when you emailed me back, I saw a tag below, like, here are my TEDx talks. And I was like, what? The girl's done TED Talk. I love TED Talks.
Me too.
I think they're phenomenal. So much so that I do this girls conference in the fall called Simply Beautiful. And one of our sessions is built around a TED Talk style. We have like 3 speakers. They get like a small amount of time. They talk about one topic. And we call them girl talk sessions because it's a girls retreat.
Yeah.
But that's how much I love that style of teaching.
Yeah.
So, okay. So all that to say, I am dying to know your story.
Okay.
So maybe you could take some time. I got my hot coffee here. I am ready for it. Tell me all the things, Erin Jones.
Oh my gosh. There's no time to tell you all the things, Erin Jones, but I'll tell you the abbreviated version. As I was telling you before we got started recording, I do my talk literally 3 or 4 times a week with kids. So I talked to 150,000 kids last year. And I typically do the talk anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. So I'm going to keep it brief here. But God has given me this really incredible journey of hills and valleys and sunshine and rain. And before I share my story, I'm going to share that it's funny you would call this week, because I got a call last week to be the chaplain for the WNBA finals. So I got to be the chaplain. I didn't even know there was such a thing for the WNBA, but I tried out 20 years ago, and somebody knew that I was a believer, and then I loved basketball and said, hey, we're going to be out of town. We're the chaplains. Would you take over? And what God told me is, you have 5 minutes with these ladies. You need to tell them the ups and downs of your own journey, and that God gives us the ups and downs and the all-arounds intentionally to bring us to a point, and that it's all part of his plan. And so I want to preface my telling of the story by saying, I just shared my story in 5 minutes with the Seattle Storm and the Washington Mystics last week. And the first thing they said when I was done, and it's funny because of something you already said, they're like, girl, how can you be 47 years old? You have this big old story. And what? And that's what they wanted to know. What's your makeup regimen?
Yes.
What's your makeup regimen? So it was just really funny. Here I am with the world's greatest athletes, female athletes, and they're asking me what I'm doing to stay young. And what I told them is, I'm in my purpose. I'm in my purpose. I'm doing what I love.
I love that.
And that's really my journey. And that's what keeps me young, is I stick to my purpose. I stay in my lane. But, all that being said, I was born on June 3rd, 1971. And that day is important because my mother left me in the hospital that day. So my mother was a white woman. My father was a black man. And she was not allowed to keep me in 1971 in Minnesota. And so I was orphaned that day. And literally on my official birth certificate, it says Negro man for the name of my father. Today, that's what's on my official birth certificate. And so, you know, I tell young people all the time, I do work in youth ministry, but I also work in public schools sharing my story. And I tell people all the time that it's not about where you start, it's about where you finish. And so, you know, what the devil means to destroy you, God will use. And so I was left in the hospital, but I was really fortunate. About 90% of kids who look like me don't ever get adopted, but I was adopted. And I was adopted as a baby by a white couple from northern Minnesota. They had no relationships with anyone black, had never actually met anyone black. They just knew they wanted to adopt babies nobody wanted. And I was one of those babies. And so I was adopted. I was taken to another country. At 5, my parents took their teaching jobs and we moved to the Netherlands when I was 5. So I think about all the time, if my mother had kept me, I never would have gone across an ocean. And I ended up going to the United Nations school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And I got to meet people like the president of Egypt's wife. I met her when I was 9 years old. And actually, for this audience, it's really important to know that my best friend in 4th grade was the Israeli ambassador's daughter. She was from Jerusalem, and her name was Yael Ronen. And she was my absolute best friend. And of course, in 1980, which is when I was in 4th grade, there was the war between Israel and Palestine. I don't know that it was a war, but there were altercations on a regular basis. And every week she would come to school just worried about her family, worried about her grandparents back in Jerusalem and back all over Israel. And I had a real passion and compassion for her and her situation. And I discovered that in our school was a little boy who was the Palestinian Liberation Organization ambassador's son. So imagine these two kids are in our school together because it's the United Nations. The United Nations was literally a mile away from my school. So they're together in a school. Meanwhile, their countries are fighting each other. And I decided at 9 years old, I'm going to solve the Middle East crisis. And so I began to teach myself Arabic and Hebrew. And I tell kids all the time, like, I was a weird child. Like, who at 9 years old decides they're just going to teach themselves to speak other languages? But I was so sad for my friend and so sad that these groups were at war. And we would get a call somewhere midway through my 4th grade year from the president of Egypt. And at the time, they were in civil war, so they were having war within their country. He would eventually be assassinated, actually, Anwar Sadat. But his wife had this real mission to bring peace to the world. And so she had a belief in 1980 that if she could talk to small children about peace, maybe we could stop war if the next generation was raised up to believe in peace. And so just by God's design, as I'm in the middle of this drive to learn Arabic and Hebrew and solve the Middle East crisis, we get a visit from the president of Egypt's wife. She speaks at our school, and 3 4th grade kids get invited to have lunch with her, and I'm one of them. And so I get to sit with the president's wife at 9 years old and share with her my passion for peace. And she tells me that day, and I know now it was God's voice through her mouth. She says to me, Erin, you are a world changer. And I will never forget that day. When you're 9 years old and a president's wife tells you you're a world changer, I tell teachers all the time, the words of adults are so powerful in the lives of young people, and we can either speak life or death into them. And that day she spoke life into me, and it would change really how I did school and how I showed up at school. I was determined to be the best that I could possibly be, like the best version of me, because I knew that's what it would require if I was going to change the world, was to be the best version of me. And I also knew that I was going to need to come back to the U.S. to go to law school. I knew in my head, like, the only way to change the Middle East crisis was to work at the United Nations, because it's what I knew. And I knew the court was there. And if I could just get a law degree and go write law, that's what will change the Middle East crisis. So I did everything that I could to get to the United States. And at 18, actually at 17, it was March of 1989, I got a letter from Princeton that I had been accepted there. But Princeton never looked at my financial aid paperwork to see that my parents were teachers. They assumed I was one of the rich kids at the school. And even though I graduated at the top of my class, I was number 2 in my class, played 3 varsity sports. I was captain of all 3, MVP of all 3, played 2 instruments in the band, spoke 4 languages fluently. Princeton gave me a $1,000 scholarship. And mom and dad were like, yeah, not happening. You are not going to Princeton. And I ended up going to the sister school to Princeton, which is called Bryn Mawr. It is a liberal arts, all women's college, very elite. I'd never visited, and I would tell parents today, don't ever send your child to a college you haven't visited first. But my parents we lived in Europe. We didn't have money, so we had to trust the little brochure. And the college said that it was in Philadelphia. And at the time, The Cosby Show was my favorite show on TV. I wanted to be Claire Huxtable so bad. And I know that Bill Cosby is a hot mess. But at the time, he was, they were like my Black family because I was raised in this white American family. And they became like what was possible. And the show was in Philadelphia. And so I thought, okay, slavery, civil rights movement, Cosby Show. Like, this is how I'm going to live in America. And I was so excited. And I got here to America, and my very first day, we're driving out to campus, and it's not in the city of Philadelphia. It's out on the main line, which is the 7th wealthiest community in the United States. And the first sign in town is Bryn Mawr Cricket Club, no coloreds or Jews allowed here. And this is 1989. And the sign would not come down until 2012. So I want you to imagine the kind of community where that kind of a sign was tolerated for that long. It was not a friendly community to me. And I ended up playing soccer and basketball. And when basketball season was over that first year, I just stopped going to class. It was before the internet. It was before cell phones. So I couldn't just call home and tell my parents, here's what's happening to me. I was called the N-word so many times I stopped counting. Anytime I went to a store, I was followed. If I went to a restaurant, they would seat me in the back. It was horrible. I just stopped eating. I stopped going to class in March of that year. I went from believing that I could change the world to believing that I was a mistake. And it was a Friday, first weekend in April. It was a Friday night, and I prayed this prayer to God. I had been raised going to church. I wouldn't say that I was a believer, but I had been raised going to church. And I laid in my dorm room, and I prayed this prayer. God, I think I am a mistake, and I wish you would just take my life. I'm too scared to shoot myself or take drugs, but I wish that you would just let me not wake up tomorrow morning. And I went to sleep that night, and I woke up, and the sun was shining so brightly that next morning. And I felt this thing inside of me that I know now is God's voice. But at the time, it was just this weird urge to go for a walk. And I put my tennis shoes on and my shorts, and I just started walking. And I walked about 2 towns outside of my college town, and I found where the help lived. So the Black community that served all the white people lived together in this really small community. And right in the middle of the neighborhood, a guy named Dr. J had built a basketball court. And for those of you who are not basketball players, he's only one of the greatest basketball players ever to have played the game. I didn't know who he was because I didn't grow up in America, but there was this man playing basketball on a court with his boys. And there were 9 guys. They were waiting for one more to play 5-on-5. And someone saw me coming and pointed at me and said, you are obviously a basketball player. We need you right now. And I would play with an NBA superstar that day. And that's not what changed my life. I mean, it was awesome playing with him. But what changed my life was after the game, sitting on the sidelines with 4 high school boys. They'd all dropped out of school. When they talked about their school experience, it was buildings that were falling apart, buildings that didn't have enough books or chairs. And I'll never forget asking these boys, so what's your dream for the future if you're not going to get a high school diploma? Like, I knew there was no future for them. And these boys said, we don't plan to live to be 21. Why would we dream? And that is where I met God. I knew in that moment, in that second, this is what I was made for. This is how I was meant to change the world. I was adopted by a white couple who were teachers. I was raised in another country in a phenomenal school where they believed I could be amazing. I am Black and white. I'm an academic and an athlete. And God wants to use that for me to be a champion for kids. And I knew that. I knew that on the side of that basketball court. And I remember walking back to my dorm just in tears, like knowing this is my purpose. Like I had just prayed, God, take my life. But I knew, wow, this is how God wants me to change the world. He wants me to be a champion for kids. And it's now 28, 29 years later, and I'm still working with kids. And I never became a lawyer. I got my teaching degree after college. Actually, I got a BA in English, French, and Spanish, and then got married and went back to school to become a teacher and have worked as a teacher, worked as a youth pastor. My husband was a youth pastor for the first 10 years of our marriage, and then in youth ministry, young life, and other things for another 5 years. And now we are both in public education.
That is phenomenal. I'm like dripping tears right now as you're telling. I apologize for my ugly cry.
That's okay.
So as someone who has worked with youth before, just hearing you talk about the importance of the words that we say to young people just hits so close to my heart, because not even getting into my story, but I look back at the impact that people's words had on me.
Yeah.
And man, from you going from hearing from a president's wife that you're a world changer, to having these experiences and words spoken over to you that are like, no, I'm a mistake.
Yeah.
I think it is incredibly moving just to realize that God called you into that space with your story and your experiences to speak into the lives of kids.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the world tells you or other people are saying. Really, like, you're all world changers. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Every single one of you. Mm-hmm. What does it look like for you just to live out that, like, from the side of the basketball court to actual, like, moving forward from there? What does that actual calling look like?
Wow, there's so many stories. My husband and I got married literally 2 months after I graduated from college. So he was a college football player. He played at Oregon State University. We actually got engaged there. At my college, everyone went away overseas junior year, but I had just met him, and I did my year abroad at Oregon State University. I convinced them that I had lived abroad my whole life and that I really want to see another part of America. So I flew across the country, got engaged to my husband, and we ended up at Notre Dame, where he was doing graduate school. And I substitute taught, and we did youth ministry together. And then I got hired at a private school because I didn't have my teacher credential yet. So all I could do in the public system was substitute teach, and we needed more money than that. So I got hired. I got seen on a basketball court. Here's basketball again. I got seen by an athletic director on a basketball court one day, and he said, "We've got this position open at a private school. We need you. Would you come teach?" And I did. And what's really cool, and it's, again, cool how God brings things around and how I'm talking to you now, because I taught in this private school for 3 years. There were 5 Black students in this all-white, very elite private school, 5 Black kids on scholarship. And 2 of them were in my class that first year as 6th graders. And one of them, her name is Risha Donaldson. And Risha would have lunch with me almost every day. Risha would follow me around school when she could. She played sports for me. Like, wherever I was, she wanted to be. And at the time, I didn't understand that being the only Black person in the building, the only Black adult in the building, she just needed to see a model of what was possible. And I represented for her travel and languages and opportunity. And I didn't get it. She was just a 6th grade kid. Like, I didn't understand how big an impact I would have on her. But what's really funny is we just reconnected. So I taught her 24 years ago. I was on the phone on my way to a speaking engagement at a high school on the other side of our state, and a picture flashes across my screen. So my phone is up on the dashboard, and it's my best friend from Indiana, where I originally taught. And it's her with she's white, and it's her with a Black woman. And I think I recognize the Black woman, but I'm driving, so I can't really see. And then beneath the picture flashes across the screen, I'm teaching with Risha this year. And I'm like, wait, Risha Donaldson? And I have to pull my car over because I realized that my best friend, who's teaching in public school, who's only ever taught in public school, is now teaching with my first student. who had moved away to Atlanta, had lived in Atlanta for 15 years, and they end up being teaching partners. Like, what is the chance of that? Only God, right? Like, only God can do that. And here's why I share that particular story, because I know that words I spoke into her life as a sixth grader are now still speaking into her life at her 30s. I think she's probably 34, 35 now, teaching. Not only that, she teaches math, which I love. Not only that, she started a foundation to take little Black girls to a different country each year. Because I talked about travel, she started this foundation to give the same experience to kids. Not only that, she's a believer. And it was not a Christian school. It was a private, elite, whatever, rich people school. Had nothing to do with faith, but I lived out my faith in front of her. And so one of the things I tell teachers, whether you're teaching in a private school or a public school, we don't need to say Jesus. We need to be Jesus, right? And so when I share my story, it really is my testimony. Now, when I'm in a public school, I don't say Jesus, right? But it's still my testimony, and God still speaks through it. And I have tried as a public school teacher. I was a classroom teacher and then an administrator. I lived out Jesus every day. I loved kids who were unlovable. I wanted the kids that nobody else wanted. And I wanted to show them God's, like, our unmerited favor that we receive. I want to live that out for them. And so I love on the gay kids that nobody loves. I loved on the immigrant kids that nobody loved, the kids who didn't speak English. Like, give me those kids. And that's who God told me, love them, love them, love them, and help them see that they are beautiful in my eyes. And so I always had a motley crew of kids in my classroom at lunchtime. And then even once I became an administrator, people were drawn to me who just needed that extra touch from God. I was very aware that what I was doing was bigger than teaching French or Spanish or English or history or PE. It was about, that was the platform to love people the way that God does. And what's so awesome is the numbers of students who've come back to me now, years later, who are either teaching now or in youth ministry now, or whatever they're doing. They will find me somewhere, whether it's on Facebook or in a mall somewhere randomly in an airport, and just say, Miss Jones, you made a difference for me when I was 11 or 12 years old, and you spoke life into me in a way that I still remember now as an adult. And that's how I know I'm living out my calling.
I loved earlier you said, we were joking about the skin regimen, but you said, I live my purpose and I stay in my lane. You are like speaking my language right there, because on Hey Girl, we use the, run your race in your place.
Yeah. What
is the lane? And I love to think a lot and talk with women or guys too, but mostly women, about the thing about our lane is your lane can change as seasons even go. Like, you may have this one lane, but you're going to have, which you have now described, you walk through, you got married, lanes suddenly take on a different, different rhythm in marriage. And then you have these kids. And tell me a little bit, because you mentioned earlier that you have one child that's adopted. Is that correct?
Well, so oh my gosh, our family story is interesting. We have two biological kids, Israel, David.
Love that.
And then Malachi. So Malachi is the oldest, Israel is the youngest. And then we also adopted my husband's sister's little girl. My husband's sister was really struggling in life. She had her daughter move in with us when she was 6 and then never really got her life back together and overdosed and died. And she is literally born the same day as Israel, but a year older. So the kids are 21, 22, 23. And I actually stayed home with them. I didn't teach when they were little. The youngest one, my best friend that I was talking about earlier, I taught halftime and she watched him halftime. So I didn't pay for daycare. God took care of that. And the other two, I stayed home until they were all school age. So that was a season in my life that was really interesting. We actually had a school in our garage. So I homeschooled for a little bit, and I felt like God said, buy a school. So I was literally driving around a neighborhood. We were poor. But this Christian school was going out of business, and they sold me the entire school, including the desks and chairs, for $200. And I bought the school, and I opened the school in my garage, and we had about 15 kids that would come every day in the summer. every day, like from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, every day. Our church gave us pastries and we would feed them and teach them and play with them and love on them. Anyway, so that's my 3 kids. And then we were youth pastors here in Washington State for 10 years. And one of our kids came out. He's gay and he had just lost his dad. So his mom wasn't handling things well anyway. And she just did not respond to this well and stopped feeding him and stopped taking care of him. And he lived about a mile from our house. So he just became part of our family. And his name is Josh. And he is still part of our family. He calls me mom. I'm his black mom. So he's this tall, skinny, blonde kid he's not a kid anymore. He's 32, but he is my hairdresser. He learned how to do black hair because of me. I would go in when he was in beauty school and I had straight long hair at the time. And he learned how to do relaxers and do black women's hair. And now he does my afro. He's the only one allowed to touch it. So he takes care of my hair and he's part of our family. And so we have this really unique, blended, interesting family.
There's so many things just from that. First of all, I love you sharing about you stayed home with your kids till they went to school, because all of this, like you're sharing your story, you obviously have this huge heart for education, all of these things, but your kids enter the picture and you like fully embrace.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it necessarily was easy. I'm not trying to speak that over, but but then you don't only stay home with your kids, but you're like, I'm going to open a school for a whole bunch of kids. Like if I'm going to homeschool, what is that? Go big or go home, I guess.
Go.
So you then go and buy this school, you start educating this whole group of kids.
The whole neighborhood. I
don't even I can't wrap my brain around. I just need to follow you around for, can I just shadow you? Okay. So first of all, I need to know that season for you.
Yeah.
Just describe for me, because I'm thinking of we have a lot of moms that listen to this podcast, especially moms who are home with their kids right now.
Yeah.
I was a mom that stayed home with my babies till they went to school. It can be so, so easy when you've got these big dreams, not just big dreams, but like big calling, that God has placed on your heart.
Yeah.
It can be so easy for the enemy to sneak into that season when you've got these babies at home that are like, they need their mama.
Yeah, yeah.
To feel like it's a season of waiting. Well, now I'm just going to have to wait and do the baby thing. And then someday.
Yeah.
But what I love about what you just shared is like, yeah, this is a season for my babies, but it is not a season of waiting. This is a season to continue to fully embrace
what God's called me to.
I love that. But tell me, first of all, what would you say to those mamas?
Yeah. So I just was talking about this the other day. I didn't stop playing basketball through that whole time. So every day I played basketball, probably 4 to 5 days a week. I literally played basketball until the day before I delivered each of my kids. So basketball was something that it is something that I really love. But one of the things I tell women now is don't stop doing what you love. So it was in moderation, right? It was an hour a day. I made sure I was part of a gym that had a little daycare and my kids would go play. Once they got old enough and I played in tournaments all over the place, they would come and be with me. So I had brought my kids with me on the journey. And they got to see different places and different people. My husband was a youth pastor at the time. And so as a whole family did youth ministry together. So the boys at the time, we just had the boys. The boys came along to youth camps and youth events. And I was mom most primarily, but the other kids kind of took care of my kids off and on. And so my children were integrated into our youth ministry work. And I preached at the time too. Like my husband would have me preach sometimes. Our worship leader for the youth ministry started college in the middle of our time there. So my husband felt like God said, Erin, I need your help on worship. So I learned to play keyboard and I helped lead worship in that season too. And so I don't do that now. There are seasons of life, right? And so for a season, I wrote songs for our church. And I am a great example of kids are like, what don't you do? And I said, I'm a great example of seeds, and the talents, the parable of the talents. God has given me talents, and I have invested them. And so he gives me more. So people often ask, wow, you can speak other languages and play instruments and sports and all of that. And I'm like, I'm not so special. I just knew when God gave me talents that I had an obligation to invest in them. So that's totally not the mom thing, but I just wanted to add that little caveat. As a mother, it was really hard for me to be at home sometime at the beginning because I had been raised to be out there being a world changer. But I knew that it was the best thing. And I'll be real with you, as the mom of 2 Black boys, having been in public schools, what I knew was that I could not afford to send my little Black boys to public school if they didn't know how to read, write, and do math well, because I had seen what happened in public school for Black children. That was part of my motivation for staying home. Part of my motivation for staying home was that my mother had stayed home with me. And I knew what that did for me and the confidence it gave me. And so even though it was hard at times, like I took my kids to the library. So we did lots of things. So I wasn't just quote unquote stuck at home. I was taking my kids on trips. We volunteered. My mother-in-law had an after-school program at one of the poorest elementary schools in our city. And I would take my boys and we would go volunteer. They were like 1 or 2 and 3 or 4. We would go volunteer and be around kids who really were poor. And so my kids learned charity. They learned how to serve other people. They learned how to not judge other people. They learned how to be around other kids. And it was a really beautiful, those 5 years of being home were really a beautiful time for our family. And what's perfect about that is we got our daughter just at the end of that. And so my boys knew how to be with each other and to love each other before we added another child to the mix who actually needed a lot. She needed a lot because she'd really been abandoned and homeless and neglected. Anyway, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so my boys already had this ability to adapt and adjust. They'd traveled a lot and now could take in this sister now and really love her to the best of their ability.
You know what I love? So many things about you, but this is what keeps coming to mind is that you're not an excuse maker, you're a way maker. And I mean this because these things that you're describing that you did, when you saw an opportunity or a need, it could have been so easy, right? Yeah. To say, okay, they're the worship ministry. Well, I don't play an instrument, but you weren't like, I don't play an instrument. You're like, okay, I'll go learn an instrument. Like, when you were just a child, I want to help make peace among these 2 warring nations. You could have easily been like, I am a black and white American, like what? And you're like, okay, so I'll go learn these languages and I'm just going to do it. And I'm sitting here like, man, if we lived our lives that way, if we just refused to make excuses for things, and when God put something on our heart or there was a need in front of us, if we kind of pushed aside all the reasons why we shouldn't, couldn't, whatever, and instead we were like, okay, I'll do, I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
Just how much that alone would change the world.
Yeah.
I'm getting goosebumps. You have me so excited right now. It's kind of ridiculous.
Well, when we got our daughter the first time, she was 2. So my kids were 1, 2, and 3. And I knew at that point I needed to take a year off basketball. God just said, hey, you have got to give, especially her, but now that you have 3 of them, you got to give them your full attention. And so I took a year off of playing basketball and just invested in the kids and sewing into them. At the end of that year, her mom got stuff together and took her back. I get this call. Hey, Erin Jones, this is the Seattle Storm WNBA team. We'd like to offer you a tryout. Well, I was 29 years old. I had taken a year off of basketball, hadn't touched a basketball, hadn't run a mile, hadn't done anything for a year. And what I should have said to the lady is, do you realize how old I am and that I haven't worked out for a year and that I have small children? But instead I said, when's the tryout? So I was like, what the heck? I'm just going to try out. And 3 months, I had 3 months to go from 0 to professional ready. We had a YMCA membership and I just go down to the Y and I start training. Well, my mother-in-law calls and she said, I had this vision that I'm supposed to come live with you and take care of the kids. And so that was my open door. Okay, my kids are going to be fine. Grandma lives with us. So I trained 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. grandma's at home with the kids. I mean, just, how God works things out. So I show up at tryouts. I get a tryout not only for the Seattle Storm, but for the Portland Fire. So on a Friday, we have a 6-hour tryout in Seattle. Then I have to get on the road, and traffic here is horrible. So driving down to Portland is like a 4-hour endeavor. We get down to Portland, and Saturday, it's now a 6-hour tryout the next day. So imagine, I'm 29 years old. I have small children. I haven't played in a year. I've just trained for 3 months. I am so tired by lunch of the second day. I'm like, God, I like basketball. I don't think I love basketball this much. But I was like, I'm going to finish what I started. And during my training, I should add that I brought a bunch of young, like high school age kids along with me to training because they all thought they were going pro. And I knew these guys needed a reality check. So I would do training and bring kids with me, and they would last about 30 minutes of training. And then like, Miss Jones, we are just too tired. But it was this really great adventure of bringing kids along with me. So I get through the Portland tryouts and I am just done. I don't want to see a basketball again. I am so done. And I realize I am old and I'm just not as fast as I need to be. But the NBA live cameras come over and they want to do an interview. So it turns out I'm the oldest woman at tryouts with the most children. And they do an interview. And then this older lady comes over, and she's probably about 5 feet tall, 5'2" maybe. And she says, Erin, I've been watching you all day. And I said, what? And she said, I played on the very first women's Olympic team. And she said, I can tell you're a believer. I said, what? I didn't ever say. And she said, I could tell there's something about the way you carried yourself today. She said, when you could have been the star on the court, you passed the ball or you set a screen. She said, I am taking a group of women to Mexico to play against the Mexican Olympic team, and I want you to be our player captain. And on my 30th birthday, I got to play against the Mexican Olympic team in Mexico City in a giant outdoor stadium and share my testimony about how I met Jesus in Spanish, because Spanish is one of the 4 languages I speak. And I share that story because, again, it was an example of at 29, you don't try out for a professional team. At 30, you don't go play against a Mexican Olympic team, but God opened the door and I walked through it and I got to speak Spanish. I got to be not only the player captain, but the translator for our team. And so I would say to any women out there, your children are this incredible opportunity and you need to sow into them. But one of the things I've sown into my children, I hope, is to never give up and to never take no for an answer and to say yes to things that are too hard. Say yes when stuff is hard, because in the yeses for me, I'm the first Black woman to run for statewide office in the state of Washington. I ran in 2016 to lead public schools. I lost by 1 point. 1 point. But I tell people all the time, that propelled me into the ministry that I have today. And so I've spoken to over 200,000 people since I lost my race. But had I not said yes to the WNBA almost 20 years ago, I wouldn't have gone to Mexico. Had I not gone to Mexico, when I was done with that game, about 100 little Mexican kids lined up on the sidelines to say thank you to me. And that was my message from God. It's time to go back into the classroom. Your kids are ready for school. And that's when I started teaching again. And when I think about then running for office as the first, I didn't allow the first to stop me. I didn't allow the difficulty of the campaign to stop me. If God is the God of impossible, then we need to step into impossible. Like, that's what it's all about. And that's where we get to show his glory. It's not about us. It's not about, like, I'm not so special. My God is really special. And when I tap into God, he allows me to do things that should be impossible. But he makes anything possible. And so what I would say to moms is, wow, dream crazy big dreams and believe that God gave you the specific children that you're meant to have and the husband that you're meant to have and the house you're meant to have, and you're living in the neighborhood you're supposed to live in for a reason. And whether things are really tough right now or really great right now, all of those things in your life make up the journey that God predestined for you, that he talks about in Psalm 139. I love that Psalm 139 passage. You know, he predestined us and he knew us before our parents even knew who we were. And as an adopted kid, I think about that all the time, that God knew that I was meant to be in the Adamson family, that I was meant to marry James Jones that I was meant to have these 3 babies and move from Minnesota to the Netherlands all the way across the country to Washington State for a reason.
If I could describe your story and the example it sets is Isaiah, that here I am, Lord, send me.
Send me. Mm-hmm.
And just, I think for you to be able to speak to the power of that kind of surrender, like even when it seems impossible, to the extent of even when you're like, I don't have the skills for this. Here I am, Lord, send me.
Yeah.
And I probably won't be able to go deeply into this without getting incredibly emotional, but I'm just going to say your story of your hairdresser, your son that you have really taken into your family. I don't want to glaze over that, because I just think of the amount of times that we have these conversations, especially in Christian circles, of, gosh, what would you do if your child came to you?
Yep.
And because you know what? I'm not let's go look for controversial issues, but I am real talk, people.
Yep.
This is where we're at right now. And there is genuinely, I've been in these conversations of what do you do if your kid would come out, and people, and it's not from a bad place. People are really trying to wrestle through these things.
Yeah.
But as sorry, I'm totally getting choked up, but you sharing the story of this wasn't your child coming out. This was this boy going through something that I can't even, I think it's my mom's heart that's breaking right now, and again, I'm sure his mom didn't know what to do with it, but not feeding him, whatever. You didn't walk through what to do. You pursued in love and compassion that young man. And I just think the example of that for us to change the dialogue of how we're even thinking about this.
Right.
This is a beautiful young man who is created by God and who God loves the same way that he loves me, the same way that he loves you. And for you to see that and be like, son, you are welcome in my family. Yeah. Not only that, but you are the only one that's going to touch my fro. I feel like I need to say it out loud, that because I don't want people to miss that part of it.
Right.
We don't need to this isn't just even about how we handle the things that come in, but how are we pursuing things outside of us? How are we really intentionally and actively loving the world, the people that God's placed in front of us? And your yes is so much more than just God bringing something before you and you're being yes. This is you saying, this is you chasing after things. Yes, God, I just want, I want to bring you to the world and everything you place in front of me and everything within reach. I've said this before, but so I really, really mean it. If this episode did not release from this moment, the power of what you just said in my own life, I probably couldn't measure it at this point. So thank you. That feels so trivial to say.
Wow.
But thank you for sharing, and thank you for saying yes, because I know for me, other people saying yes inspires me and encourages me and really empowers me to keep saying yes, to keep living that life. And I love that. I just think, never mind the amazingness of your hair and whatever your skincare regimen is, just your whole life to me just exemplifies beauty and what God is able to do when we live fully surrendered. Have you ever heard the quote? I don't know why I'm going to blank on where it originated, but the quote being, the world is yet to see what God is able to do through a man fully surrendered to him. Have you ever heard this?
I've seen it. Yeah.
Okay. So for years and years, I have kept that quote as almost this striving for, God, gosh, that. This is the first time in my life where I feel like I'm sitting face to face with someone who has lived that.
I'm trying to every day. It's funny. You can see on your screen, but people out there can't see. I'm wearing the Nike, a Nike t-shirt. And I know that's really controversial now too. But God said, I want you to be controversial. I want you to be controversial because whether it's my son and being gay in the church or whether it's racism, I'm doing a ton of racial reconciliation work right now in churches, in white churches. Partly because God made me black and white. So he made me this bridge. I've worn Nike now for the last 2 weeks with intention to engage people in really tough conversations about this. As believers, we have to stop. I think about, my son first and how people judged him for being gay. But I also think about whether it's race or what does it mean to be American. That God has called me to step into spaces and to have conversations that are not easy to have. And so I wear Nike partly because I want us to engage in the really tough conversations. And I feel like we're kind of in this impossible place as a country that God can totally bring healing to. So in our own way as a country, we're in this really divided place, whether it's around sexual orientation or gender or racism or whatever it is. God has said, I want to be a healing balm, but I can only be a healing balm if people will step in. And so right now, my transition is stepping into this place and using the platform that God has given me to really challenge us to think about, what does love mean? What does God's love mean in this space? And how do we fully love one another? And how do we love those who, as the church, we've said are unlovable? And that's where I believe God has been raising me up for 47 years in all the stories that I've experienced to really help me to love differently and then to help others to love differently. And that's where I really feel I'm called to.
Amen. Erin, to say that this has been a gift would be such an understatement. But thank you so much for being willing to come on to share your story. I'm not only moved, but just it's powerful how important it is for you that your story points back to Jesus. I just think that alone really it's moving for me today. I would love if you're open to it as we get to wrap up to kind of, for me, take a deep breath. I felt all the feelings today. And one of the things that we have done, and this is kind of new to season 3, but is kind of this fun, like rapid fire question round. And if nothing else, for those listeners who are probably on their way to work and at this point, ugly cried all their makeup off their face, this is those few moments for them to kind of compose themselves so that they can enter their office not looking like their dog died before they left for work. So if you're ready, I just got a few get to know you. I feel like I know the answer to this, but maybe not because you're a Seattle girl, but you're going out for coffee. Are you going to Starbucks or to a local coffee shop?
So I have 2 answers to that. One of the Starbucks owners actually helped to fund my campaign when I ran for office. Yeah. So Howard Bihar, who's just he's a man of God too. He's just a really great human being. And so part of the reason that I go to Starbucks, it's everywhere here. And actually, we have a local one that's I can literally walk to from my house. It's 1.5 miles. I'm a crazy walker, by the way. But I do Starbucks partly because I can get points and get free Starbucks. And because I travel so much, just it makes sense to go somewhere that I can get points and get free ones. So I have 13 free ones right now on my card. That's how much Starbucks is like my office, though. So I don't have an office. I travel all over the state and all over the country. So Starbucks is really my office. So.
I was also thinking it was kind of an unfair question because in Seattle, Starbucks and local
everywhere
is the same thing.
It is local. Yeah. Yeah. But I do have a favorite local store in Tacoma where we go to church, and I go there always. They make the best coffee, but it's like an hour from my house. So only when I'm in Tacoma for church, then I go there.
Fair enough. So tell me, in conversation, would you rather text or phone call?
Hate the phone. hate the phone, which is ironic that we're on the phone right now, but we're FaceTiming so I can see you.
Yes.
I'm all about facial expressions. And so I prefer to be face to face with someone, but I will text in a heartbeat because I'm a writer by trade. So I am a two thumb texter. I love texting.
Love it. So if you're going for a road trip, not by yourself, but with someone else, do you choose to drive or to ride?
Always ride. My husband has driven us we just been married for 25 years this year, and he always will drive, and I'm always on the passenger side. Always, always. Yes.
Okay, so then what is the last book that you read and really enjoyed?
So I would say that I'm not a reader now. I majored in literatures of the African diaspora in English, French, and Spanish. I read so much as a kid. I read so much as a young adult. And now I travel. So I'm on the road literally 5 or 6 days a week. So I listen to podcasts. That's my favorite. And my favorite podcast is Quick to Listen. And it's a Christian podcast that really addresses the political kind of controversial issues of the time. And because that's what I do for a living, I do assemblies for kids, but I also do work around equity and social justice. So that podcast really helps me get some different perspectives from big folks. I think Billy Graham actually was one of the founding members of the organization that does the podcasts, but I like it because they bring people from a wide variety of Christian perspectives. And I, like you, like to be pushed by people. I don't ever want to be in an echo chamber. So I am around lots of different kinds of voices, and Quick to Listen for me is that, and then something called Code Switch. Those are my two favorite podcasts.
I'm giving like perks to whoever named Quick to Listen. That's a great name for the podcast.
It's awesome.
It's really good. What is the last movie that you actually spent money to see, whether it was like a rental or you actually went to the theater?
So we have Movie Pass. So we can go to see a movie every day if we want to.
Love it.
I'm trying to think what we just, oh my gosh. I can't even remember the name of this, but we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary in Mazatlan, Mexico. And I made a promise to my husband, I'm going to do the whole trip in Spanish. So when I'm speaking to you, obviously in English, because he doesn't speak Spanish, but every other part of the trip, I'm going to speak in Spanish, which people loved. They were like, they call me La Giganta, the giant one, with the hair. I'm La Giganta with the hair. We decided one day to go to the movies, and all the movies were in Spanish. So we went and saw, I can't even remember what it's called, but it's like the Transylvania Vacation. It's a kids movie.
Yeah.
And we saw it in Spanish and had the best time. It was so much fun. And my husband would turn to me at points like, okay, I understood that part, but I really didn't. So we're sitting in this kids movie with all these little Mexican kids, and here's these two giant black people like laughing hysterically and translating, and it was just the best. We had so much fun.
This is not on my list of questions, but I never did ask you, how tall are you? Because you mentioned a couple of
6
times.
feet.
Okay,
6
people
feet.
see you and they're like, you must be a basketball player.
Yes. Well, and I typically wear heels too. So I'm usually with the hair and the heels, I'm about 6'5". So I am tall wherever I go. People tell me all the time, oh, you're so tall. Like, I don't know that I'm tall. But and then my boys are taller than me. So I'm actually, in our biological family, I'm the smallest in our house. So my boys are 6'3" and 6'4", and they're both over 300 pounds. So I am the littlest one in our house, which is funny, being so tall. But yeah, we are a tall family.
That's amazing. So I got 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
While you're going to see a movie, if you could bring in your favorite snack,
popcorn with butter. Oh,
yeah.
That's a question. Like, that's the whole reason I go to the movie theater is for the popcorn with movie theater butter on it. There's something about butter in the movie theater that just, I could eat a giant. My husband, it makes him crazy. He's like, do you really need? Yes, I do. I gotta have it. Yes.
Preach. Okay. So last question. I am hypothetically handing you a $100 bill that you can only spend to do something fun for yourself. What you gonna do?
I would probably, because I'm an athlete, I'd probably go buy a really nice pair of running shoes. Because when I tried out for the WNBA, it was the first time I bought a pair of shoes that were more than $35. Like, I prided myself and I'm going to get the cheapest. And my parents actually bought me a really nice pair of shoes to try out with. I always had really cheap stuff. And now I'm at a place in my life, now that the kids are adults, that I can buy something decent. And I've learned to just treat myself every once in a while. So running shoes would probably be the thing that I would get with those.
Do you have a favorite brand?
Nikes. I am and I know that's super controversial right now, but I've been wearing Nike since I was 14, and I went and bought more now. So I have lots of Nikes.
So, true confessions as we wrap this up. I love the look of all Nike shoes, but I don't know if it's the way my foot is or how I run.
Oh,
I can't run in Nikes.
Yeah.
And I want to run in them because they're so cute. And I'm that shallow that I just care what they look like. Yeah. But I have to do like the old lady running shoes, the Saucony and which they need to get their act together.
Okay, look at this. Hold on. I'm going to show you the new shoe that came out from Nike that's like the Saucony. It's this shoe. It's called the Zoom Fly.
Wait, what's it called? I'm writing this down.
It's the Nike Zoom Fly.
Zoom Fly.
Yeah. I'll send you a picture of it. So they are like the Saucony. I mean, they're designed for running. They're not your typical Nike running shoe. It's a Nike shoe that was made now, like the Saucony. Yeah. So I got a red pair, I got a blue pair, I got a black pair.
You literally just changed my life. all of your speaking before. Let's just take that off. This moment, Erin, changed my life forever.
I mean, I get it because I couldn't run in the other shoes either, but they just came out with this new Zoom Fly shoe that is really pretty awesome. And it's the thick, grainy looking shoe. For a Nike, it's a grainy looking shoe, but it's like walking on air. The other shoe, there's another one too that I just got. And I don't even know what it's called, but I'll send you a picture.
Oh, I like that one. Yes.
Like on air cushions. This shoe makes me happy. Like, I get happy when I wear this shoe.
That shoe makes me happy to look at.
It is, and it comes in 6 different colors. So
okay, you got to send me that one.
I will.
Too.
I'll send you pictures of both of them so that you can know what they really are. But this is my new favorite shoe. So that's my new passion right now. Is I used to have heels, so I have like 150 pairs of heels. But now that I am not an executive for a school district, I am in shoes almost every day, just because I can. And I run half marathons now, so I have a half marathon coming up next weekend, and so I run every day now. So I'm in tennis shoes most often now.
I am so excited that we just had this conversation. When I get whichever pair I go for safe towards, the first thing I'm going to do is take a picture of them on my feet and send it to you and be like, I'm hitting the road, girl. All thanks to you. Yay! Oh, Erin, thank you so much for this today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me so much. Yeah, great questions. I feel blessed. I'm blessed to be a blessing.